This week, Cheryl Biswas, a threat intel specialist working in the commercial sector, is with us to discuss what we don't know will probably hurt us in the context of supply chain security. Stay tuned for Below the Surface. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Welcome to Below the Surface, the firmware and supply chain podcast. This is episode number 26, being recorded on March 27th, 2024. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, and I am joined by Mr. Alan Alford, who's currently the CISO for Eclipsium. Alan, welcome.
Howdy, thank you.
Hey, man, it's good to have you. Our second podcast ever together.
Yes, this is going to be a good one, too. I can already feel it. We already talked to our guest ahead of time and learned some cool things she knows, and it's going to be a good show.
Just a quick announcement. So Below the Surface listeners can learn more about Eclipsium by visiting eclipsium.com/go. You can find on that page the ultimate guide to supply chain security, an on-demand webinar I presented called Unraveling Digital Supply Chain Threats and Risks, a paper on the relationship between ransomware and the supply chain, and a customer case study with DigitalOcean. If you're interested in seeing our product in action, you can also sign up for a demo, all that at eclipsium.com/go. We are, of course, excited to have Cheryl on the show today. She's a threat intel specialist from Canada. She gained initial access to InfoSec through a help desk backdoor, pivoted into roles for vendor and change management, jumped a gap into privacy and disaster recovery, then laterally moved into security audits and assessments. Following her keen interest in geopolitics and tech led her down many rabbit holes to cybersecurity. She loves to ask, what if, which has led her to researching APTs, botnets, ransomware, software supply chain compromises, and the risk to critical infrastructure, presenting at many different conferences. Cheryl, we are delighted to have you on the show with us today.
How's it going, eh?
It's representing Canada. I love it. Representing the home country.
That's a boot.
It's so great to be on this podcast with you guys. Thank you. I love listening to all of the works and the people you've had on before. I mean, for me, literally, it is like standing on the shoulders of giants because I can just learn endlessly from people's experience and knowledge. Best way to share.
Yeah. Well, that's why we do podcasts, right? So we can share the knowledge with the world. I also loved in your bio how you made that like an attack chain. The description of your experiences reads like
moved laterally. Chain. Yes,
I didn't quite get that the first time I read your bio, but when I read it on the show, I was like, oh, like you probably could have seen the light bulb go off on the top of my head.
Right,
it's very well
Cheryl
played.
is leet.
It's very well.
Cheryl
played.
is leet.
So Cheryl, I guess for our audience. Describe kind of your background in how you came, your journey to today, where you're very concerned, rightfully so, about a lot of supply chain topics.
In a word, I'm just weird, and I'm fascinated by things that other people just pass by. So I didn't really expect I would ever find myself here, but I was a Star Trek geek from, I can't remember, 5, 6 years old. And technology, but I had some challenges with math, which actually turned out to be, I think, a learning disability. Once I figured out I could take computers apart and put things in and teach myself programming, I just kept going down that. Then I pressed pause, was a stay-at-home mom, literally baking the cookies, doing the things for 10 years, had to go back to work because, income, and started from the ground up. But I went to a small managed services provider, and these are something we should really be paying close attention to. And because I was totally in love with servers and the sound of them in the morning, and the guys were like, "Hey, she speaks human. She can talk to everybody who comes to the door or the phone." Anyway, it was a great match, and I fell down a rabbit hole when they gave me the Twitter account and said, "Help!" And I found everything. I had no idea what was on Twitter, but it was just an endless source of learning. Met the most wonderful people who welcomed me into the community with no technical background. My degree is poli-sci, but there's so many people who are self-taught. And then I just mushroomed from there. I brought security into that fold. And then somebody who was working over at one of the big four auditing firms said, come over here, join us. And it just followed my way up and deeper in. And it was always with tracking the bad guys and how can you use this in the worst possible way? So a lot of what ifs and always seeing where that led to, which brings me here. And I've met people who have really inspired me, people who I joke that I watched one of my favorite movies, and I'm not sorry, is Die Hard 4, because of all of the really terrible things you can do when you have control over the code and can then affect critical infrastructure in many unimaginable ways. At that point in time, I had no idea. But even so, I still love to come back to it because from a general perspective, this is where you want to hit it home as to this is the stuff that keeps us going. And this is why it's called critical infrastructure. If you have this, you have a heck of a lot of control over everything. And the name of the game in geopolitics is power and control.
Cheryl, is your favorite hacker movie Die Hard 4?
No, actually. I love sneakers. I really love sneakers.
Me too.
And I also, very close second, love war games. There's just...
And Hackers is third?
Hackers,
I get it. I asked this question about a lot of people, yeah.
Hackers is third. I love a great heist movie because of the combination of people involved and the subtleties. And I love the fact that there's the conspiracy theory thing going on with sneakers. So for me, it all works.
Cheryl, you've given a few different presentations on supply chain security, relatively speaking. I don't want to pinhole you to that specific topic, but you've presented on this topic. What can you just summarize some of the things that you've done presentation-wise?
Oh, yes. So actually, it initially started when Urgent 11 came out, and I was really intrigued because I had been following how you can mess around, how you can poison the well, essentially. And the fact that this is impacted embedded systems, and I had been looking at the Internet of Shit, as we call it, IoT, and IoT is going to eat the world. I was just floored, really hooked by how many, this TCP IP stack. So I spoke about it, I think about 2018, and there was this litany of attacks building off of each other because of the vulnerabilities inherited and fed through. And then I came back to that with further attacks. Just like last year, I spoke about it again because it needed to be refreshed. It was still a problem. It was just a more serious and bigger problem. And the other thing that I was interested in was I did a talk on supply chain attacks in terms of the abuse of trust. What we really were taking for granted. And we're supposed to always follow that adage of trust but verify, or trust no one. And yet we blindly trust in things and devices, and we have certificates. So I just followed that rabbit hole to see what I could unearth. And the thing that really hit me hard was China. Like 90% of the attacks that I was looking at were China, and they were long back there. And I thought, why haven't I seen anybody actually cover this? What am I missing? Have I not seen this before? And I don't think I had actually seen it before. So I did a couple of talks on that. I did one. I started with AppSec Village in 2021, and then I refreshed it when I did a presentation at MWise a couple of years later, because I really just wanted to focus on, if we're really concerned about China, we need to look at software supply chain compromise, because these guys practically wrote the book on it.
Cheryl, I want to dig in on the trust aspect of it and ask you, do you think it's that we just implicitly trust these devices that we're bringing into our network, software and or hardware? Is it a trust issue, or is it some other reason? Like we just got a lot of other things going on and we haven't focused on validating and trusting the devices and software we bring into our environments?
I'm going to start with convenience is the root of all evil. And we have a lot on our plates, and we have dwindling resources, less funding, and so much more code to have to vet and wade through. It's no longer something that you can manage with the teams that you have in-house. And to do it the right way, you really want to start seeing a specialized service for this. It's the way forward. Things have changed, and what we've been doing in the past needs to stay in the past. We got to move with the times. So I wouldn't say it's implicit trust so much as we were told that this is good enough, and we've got 3 other fires to fight, so we can sit with this because they've already told us. So it's the reliance on being told by what we see as a trusted authority, only not realizing that any and all trust authorities, any and all things that are trusted can in fact be compromised. So more so now than ever.
It's risk transference, whether healthy or not. It's risk transference.
Yeah. And it's great when it works, but we have to be prepared for the times when it doesn't. So.
But the dangerous thing that you put very well, Cheryl, and it's like the title of this episode, right, is what we don't know can hurt us.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of these instances where we're acquiring software, hardware for our organizations, we don't understand the threats, the vulnerabilities, and the risks that are in there. And like you said, well, if we don't know those, it's probably going to hurt us. You don't think you used the word probably. I think you just came out and said it's going to hurt us. I think it's bold. I like that.
No, what we don't know really is going to hurt us. And that's the thing. Ignorance is not bliss in this case. The fact of the matter is, technical debt, the inherited legacy of what we do not know. So I'm going to start with SBOM, right? The software bill of materials, which to me as a baker is quite simply that list of ingredients. And if you have somebody in your house who has a peanut allergy, you're going to be really prudent about double checking where exactly these ingredients may have originated. May contain nuts, or did it come from a facility which is actually good at managing, keeping anything that is exposed to nuts separate? We have to apply that same kind of thinking when we're looking at the bill of materials and what inherited software types are going into the software and operating systems that we're getting. A big case in point for me is real-time operating systems. We all think in terms of, Windows and Mac, but most people have no idea how significant and how widespread real-time operating systems are in just this wealth of gadgets, the things that are under the surface, below the surface, right? That are just underneath, underlying all of the things that we're using on that top level that are visible to us. But those real-time operating systems, they're not sexy. No, they're not gooey, but they are linking so many things together. And these companies get bought and sold, the acquisition problem. They get acquired numerous times. When they get acquired, what version of that software did they hand over? What were the situations, the flaws, vulnerabilities, exploits that went along with those? And the party who bought that, are they aware of it? How are they addressing it? Most importantly, what are they communicating to users, both past and future, down the line? And how well are they communicating that? The truth. Spoiler alert. It's not really happening.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about the acquisition, and I think last episode, Alan and I were talking about it, and because this particular company, Avanti, and this is just like the straight facts, has just been acquired so many times, and the history has gone back so far. Alan, I believe you sent it to me. is 4 different company names that this particular product has been
Pulse
associated
Secure is
with.
owned by 4 different entities over the years.
Yeah, so it's Funk,
it's
Juniper.
It's a game of hot potato.
Yeah, right. Funk, Juniper, Cirrus, and then Avanti, which creates its own issues just in naming, in pinning a potential vulnerability or threat to a particular name. In this case, I go back to your list of ingredients, Cheryl. If something's called one thing or maybe called a different thing, but it is in fact the same thing, that could be, a list of ingredients, a bad thing as well. Because it goes, that means peanuts, right? I forgot that. But because we changed the nomenclature, right, we might lose sight of the threats and or vulnerabilities.
And that's where what you don't know.
Hot potato. Yeah, hot potato is part of it, except some of the players are blind, right? Like that, you know what I'm saying? Like it's hot potato with blind players. Everybody's wearing a blindfold and everyone's passing the potatoes around, and the last person with the blindfold is the consumer. And now they've got burning hands and they don't know why. There's my metaphor extension.
Yeah. And how do I know what I have, right? When we talk about what you don't know, knowing what I have is increasingly challenging. I like to think that we've gotten better at so-called asset management, but now what we're talking about in the context of supply chain goes deeper than asset management.
Exactly. So much more. I mean, asset management is crucial, and yet it's one of those things we need to be doing well, but it is a challenge. It is really hard to do asset management that well, and it tends to fall by the wayside pretty quickly. It's like, well, this is good enough. But when you have a bunch of stuff connecting to your network that shouldn't be there, and you are not actively monitoring for it or tracking it, you don't have the visibility, right, into what's on your networks, what's being utilized. We were seeing this in terms of like people just bringing stuff down from the cloud, numerous things just being loaded on and nothing's actually blocking it. That kind of visibility we really need to have in terms of what are we running on and what's in there from previous incarnations that hasn't been told to us. And you've raised on previous podcasts the challenge of looking for this needle in a haystack. And that's effectively what it is. How much time is this going to take? How many people is this going to take? It is beyond our resource capability. It really is.
Yeah, I also, it resonated with me when you mentioned real-time operating systems as well. And as I start playing around with various chipsets, I'm realizing that I can write Python for that, which is great. I mean, sometimes I find it a little bit wonky, but there's a real-time operating system under the covers that's enabling you to do that higher level program that, again, we sometimes just ignore, right? We gravitate towards the user interface, towards the higher level code, and often don't want to think about or don't need to think about until something goes wrong, what's all that stuff under the covers.
Exactly. I don't know if you're familiar with the series of novels for kids, but they're really great, called A Series of Unfortunate Events.
I am not.
Lemony Snicket.
Yes. Well, if you'll indulge me for a moment, when I did my talk on these mass embedded vulnerabilities, I drew a timeline of all of the different reporting, and I called it literally A Series of Unfortunate Events. And I'll do a very quick run through of what those are, like the name and the date. So starting back in December of 2018, we've got the Free Tross 13. July 2019 was Urgent 11, which really got everybody's attention. And that called to light that list of vulnerabilities buried in the TCP IP stack, which was spread out through all kinds of devices, medical devices, printers, routers, webcams, communications equipment, you name it. And then these were huge companies as well that were affected. So just extrapolate down, it spreads from here to here to here. How do you even track that back? Well, building on that, June of 2020, we have Ripple 20, more of the same. And those fed into December of 2020 with Amnesia 33. February 2021, we've got Numberjack. April of 2021, we've got NameWreck. Then we've got August of 2021 through tech. And that should be a familiar name to a number of people as well, because that's in a lot of communications devices. And we have something a little more obscure, but incredibly vulnerable, Arcadian at the same time. I think it was Tenable that called this one out because it was trivial to exploit. And that is a concern for me, because if you're an attacker, you're looking for these opportunities and you have nothing but time and money to go find them and then exploit them. And as we know, you can find anything on Shodan. You just go hunting.
Right.
So you may be very surprised at the kinds of things you can look up and find, as well as finding the operations manuals for many of these devices, where literally the hard-coded user ID and password are there online for anybody who's prepared to just go look for it. And how many things are left with the default in place? As we know, so many. We go down to September 2021 and we've got real tech again. So we're going more into the embedded Wi-Fi capability, but our world runs on Wi-Fi in these chipsets, and they are in everything. Go from there to.
And I also think, Cheryl, I think a lot of your examples aren't necessarily open source components; they're commercial components as well.
Yeah.
And I think we get really excited when we talk about open source software supply chain, because we have visibility into the code. So we can identify these components, we can see it.
Yeah.
A lot of my concern in a lot of these commercial components, which is you've already pointed out in many of your examples, are widely used in a number of different devices, but it's a commercial component, making it even more difficult to create an SBOM for it, to identify it. Where is it being used? Who was it sold to? They're not going to tell you who it was sold to, right?
No.
But in open source, we have an easier job. How do we deal with the commercial software supply chain when we talk about embedded systems?
Well, as we know responsible disclosure. This is an ongoing battle, and we understand in this community, it's essential. And we really should never punish the people who have found it and are willing to come forward and say, hey, this is a problem. If you know that something's bad, just being as a mom, right? If you know something's bad, you need to tell the truth about it. It's that black and white to me. But in the world of profit and loss statements, things are a lot more gray. And the big challenge is effectively putting in regulations and then enforcing those regulations. That's how you get the compliance needed from both public and private entities, but especially when you're dealing with private entities who don't, it's not open source. And until somebody makes them open up, they don't have to. They can fight that battle uphill as long as they have the resources to do so.
Oh, and they will, and they have.
Yes.
Recent conversations with our mutual friend Josh Corman have, detailed some of those, discussions that have been happening. So I think. Go ahead, Alan.
I was just going to say the folks who don't disclose are the same folks who may very well be using open source in their proprietary commercial stuff as well, without having disclosed that either, right? Like that's another rabbit hole, is the hybrid environments. FPGA chips that have paid for code and open source code and whatever else crammed in them, and now that chip is the commercial product that's suffering the problems. And there's so the lineage, heritage. Whether they sourced the bad thing themselves, whether they inherited the bad thing themselves. Lack of disclosure is a huge issue across the board.
Great point. I think of it like high fructose corn syrup, and how many different ways can you label that when you sneak it into products? So the average person has no idea that something they're not supposed to be consuming in mass quantities is actually in that, and going by that name.
It's really weird. I'm super diligent about like seemingly weird things like high fructose corn syrup in maple syrup, because my kids, right? And I'm sure a lot of people, those of us that have kids, many will probably relate to this, is that when they eat anything that has maple syrup on, and if you give your kids the maple syrup bottle, like it's a lot of maple syrup they're putting on it, right? It's pools and pools. And I have three boys. Like I can't keep it in stock because I have to like you're just wasting it, right? Like most of it's getting thrown out. But I'm also diligent about going, we can't have one that has high fructose corn syrup because I know how my boys consume it. I make sure real maple syrup, right? So that S-bomb ingredient list is super important in this weird particular case, right?
Absolutely. And I just want to take a second because you mentioned a very dear friend of ours, Josh Corman, and to say how much I appreciate and am grateful to the work that he and Alan Friedman and members of I Am the Cavalry have done over the years to really raise awareness about the risks in devices that most of us just take for granted, and especially with IoT and medical devices. Because when you ask the question, well, how bad can it be? Followed by, did anybody die? I hate to say it, but the answer is yes. One of the things a friend of mine had said to me was, all safety regulations are written in blood. And that is a thing to consider. That's what it took to get that in place. Right.
And I think being proactive is much better than having to write them in blood.
Absolutely.
Which is why we're evangelizing these issues today. I did want to ask you about so-called like enterprise IoT. Where do you see a lot of these devices in enterprise? Like what's your sense, or I don't know if you talk to your peers about when IoT devices show up in the enterprise, or is it just a different class of these devices altogether?
So, that's another area that I've given talks on, because it's that lack of understanding about the difference between IT and IoT, and that this is essentially dumb. It has this machine-to-machine communication, but it is not the cognizant device that our laptops are or our smartphones are. But these things have sensors and they have real-time operating systems in them. And many years ago, when they were, for example, in the use in the field for ICS SCADA for monitoring and feeding back, they were effectively air-gapped, and they weren't talking to the rest of the world. They had one job to do, and they did it. But our world is so much more complex, and things that were never meant to be connected online to the internet now have these connections. And because it was never meant to be that way, it's not as secure a build as if it had initially been constructed that way. So we have a plethora of communications type devices, like similar to things like, I'll use a generic Polycom in a generic sense. But again, and routers and things on.
I've been thinking about this. So also, I think storage devices could fall in these classes.
Yes.
Unified communications is another area that I've been thinking about, because in my role at Eclipsium, right, I think about what are enterprises using and consuming that may have real-time operating systems, firmware, and maybe components that interconnect them that could be an attack surface that we don't know about.
Yeah,
I think we've done a pretty good job covering most of those areas, right? Wi-Fi controllers is another one.
Yeah, there may or may not have been some chips in common between unified communications and routers. Two of the ones you mentioned may have had the same chip embedded in both of them, and there may or may not have been a botnet that actually exploited both at one time on the internet.
Really,
and
really
these
good
chips
point.
are so cheap too. I think that's the other thing that's led to where we are today. Is it's so inexpensive to enable this functionality.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally buy things from China, like chips from China. That's like one of my newer things is acquiring these. And I actually got like a whole PCB with an ESP32 and a screen on it, and it was like $12. So if I can buy that for $12, right? This technology is in all of the things that we have in our enterprise potentially.
Yeah, cheap and cheerful. But that's the thing. What you raised was a good point. It's that outlying attack surface that we simply haven't taken into account. And it's massive. And when things like sensors that regulate temperature controls on trucks and on freezers for food, all kinds of medical devices and monitoring equipment within our hospitals, logistics controls. If you're thinking of even airplanes or guidance systems, it's well beyond the time it would take to even get into explaining it. But all of these are vulnerable. And if you are able to enter that realm and do the upgrade through the trusted device or process to all of them, if you can own that, you have the mass compromise that is going to give you your very bad outcome for the targeted party.
Yeah. So we talked about Josh Corman, and he reminded me recently of a story I told him a while ago, which led to a segment years ago on one of my podcasts. And I believe it was my middle son. My wife is in the hospital in labor, and they had just hooked up the heart rate monitor. And I looked up at the screen. She's like, "Oh, look, it's the baby's heartbeat." And I'm like, "Is that Windows 98?" And I was like texting Josh. I'm like, "You're not going to believe this." And I put it out there as a tweet after we agreed that we wouldn't use social media during the labor and delivery process, but that went out the window. And it was like one of my most popular tweets ever, and sparked discussions about, medical device security and safety.
There was a batch of COVID vaccine that was compromised because one of the temperature regulators and at some point in the process of the manufacturing of the vaccine, the bad guys got in and altered the temperature reporting. They changed the temp, but had it reporting the same temp that was showing on the others. And they got to a whole batch of COVID vaccine. So there's people who got vaccinated and thought they were protected and weren't.
There you go.
Because of an exploit of a temperature regulator.
So as somebody who does threat intel for a living, and my focus is always, what is the worst thing that you could do? And if you wanted to gain control, we have very, very serious state-sponsored adversaries, both in China and in Russia. And if the name of the game is to have that degree of control to bring something to their knees, we saw what happened. COVID was a taste of how a pandemic can really stop the world. And there were lessons learned that I think we have to now be addressing as we go into this. There's no walking away from it. It's on the news all the time. The tension, the current global tensions, but especially the arcing tensions between the U.S. and China and the concerns. So if I will take a couple of minutes to say I've paid a lot of attention over the years, just tracking China's capabilities and involvements. They are masters of the long game. So that's the thing that I would start with. When you see them, they are 20 steps ahead of you. They have been laying that plan in place for longer than you can even realize. And now things are coming to light about their dwelling time, their evidence within our systems. You have to assume the worst. You have to accept that they have planted stuff in there and they are using it. A case in point. So I brought a little thing that I was going through recent reporting. And one of the things that was reported on is cranes, American cranes at our ports. We learned, think of the Suez Canal and the backlog on shipping when that massive boat turns sideways. Think of NotPetya and the lineup for miles of transport trucks at ports because they couldn't function because of what had happened with NotPetya bringing everything down. Well, this to me is critical infrastructure. Those ports, those massive ports, are the lifeblood to our nation and to any nations that are reliant upon it. 80% of the cranes used in U.S. ports come from ZPMC, a Chinese manufacturer. And Como News reported in March that they found unique communications devices, which were cellular modems equipped to be accessible remotely, that were not part of the intended functioning of those cranes. And this was so significant that the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Republican Mark Green, I think, called it outright Chinese espionage. So for me, as we look back just to February and the discovery of Volt Typhoon, another major Chinese threat actor, targeting critical infrastructure, this prompted major warnings from the U.S. government about destructive and disruptive cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure. Best way to do that? Very, very effective. Software supply chain compromise, because you go in one source, one trusted source, and it is able to disperse that malicious code. It is able to reroute the normal processes and literally take the trusted following where it wants it to go, and then to distribute something evil.
So now that
we're talking about
go ahead, Alan. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we're talking about precursor to kinetic warfare, but also warfare in its own right. Like kinetic isn't even required anymore.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is.
So now that we've scared everyone to death.
Sorry.
That's okay. I think it's important. I think it's, we have to talk about the threats that are out there.
Yeah.
But what do we do about it, Cheryl? What's your take on starting to put plans and acting upon said plans? What do we do?
We need to listen to the people the canaries in the coal mine. We need to listen to the people who are willing to go and lift up the rug to find the stuff that we simply have walked past. We have to be doing things differently, and worst case analysis needs to be leveled up in light of the fact that we have so much more code and AI and capabilities that were never factored in even 10 years ago. So new level of expectations. 2, we have to have authorities work on regulation and enforcement so that we have verification and validation on what we're using. We're placing trust in processes that we need to have to make our lives easier. We automate so much. We think of the CI/CD pipeline, for example. Think of PyPy and NPM, which are these repositories of code, open source code that so many developers for so many industries rely upon. And it's a culture in terms of being able to contribute and draw from these wells, to accept that the poisoning of these wells has been ongoing and is steadily increasing, and then to look at it with fresh eyes in terms of how is this happening? Again, how are we verifying and validating what we are accessing? And then third, to accept that we do not have the in-house capability to do this effectively. We need to do it differently. We need to look outside for a good third party, because that will help us. And I'm not doing that to, promote anybody specifically, but to recognize our limitations. When we recognize our limitations, we can do a much better job at what we're supposed to be doing, and then bring somebody in whose skill set and capabilities are those to really make it work effectively. But
I want to harp on that for just a moment, Cheryl, because I think it's an excellent point that we will often raise the white flag and admit that all of the software and hardware that I'm bringing into my organization to accomplish our goals, that we don't have enough resources in that particular organization to validate and do that continuous validation of that software and hardware. And I think that's something we just need to state and get it out there. Like, let's not debate it anymore. We don't have the resources.
No one
to do
entity.
this.
Yeah. No company has the resources to do that. That's a full-time task, equal in size to the deployment of whatever the gear is you're purchasing.
Right.
I mean, it's daunting.
Yeah. I mean,
it's
some do attempt to do that in various capacities, but it's a deep rabbit hole for sure. And, I think it highlights some of the other problems that we have is that we don't necessarily always have the visibility. Even if we start digging in, it can be extremely difficult to get an SBOM. And some are doing it. But we're not set up to do that from a lot of the vendors that maybe don't want to give an SBOM or do some of those things to help us for various reasons too, right?
Yeah.
Eleanor brought up the legal ramifications of your SBOM, that you have open source software that you haven't disclosed, and now there could be a legal issue. So that's just one example.
Yeah, it's as nice as it would be to use a carrot. We are going to need a stick.
Yeah, and I think that's when we come down to regulation too. And I also think I love these points, Cheryl, because I think I want to wipe out some of the debates we've been having. Right, we're debating a lot of regulation in this context, and we don't need to debate whether or not we need regulation. The debate needs to be, how do we get the right regulation to solve some of these problems that we have with our various supply chains?
Amen.
That's where I'm at now. You agree?
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah.
Me too. And I'm a Texan. We don't generally go for regulation from the get-go. And I'm a firm believer in somebody with authority has got to get on top of this situation, or it's never going to get resolved.
Yeah, because we can't afford to stay in that like limbo mode any longer than we have, and we are going to see a whole lot more badness happen. It's literally, like you said, it is under the surface. We don't know it's there because we haven't been able to look at it. We haven't been able to do enough to like lift the cover up, lift the hood up, and really check to find the dirt that's there. And we don't know what we don't know. So this is what we have to do. We have to go looking for it. When you think of threat hunting teams, they go looking for trouble. Mm-hmm. That's what we're going to need to go do.
And when we find things, and some of these things are easier to detect than others, we have to make sure we have the appropriate resources to act upon them, specifically with critical infrastructure. And I feel like this is one of the problems that we've talked about a little bit, but maybe needs more discussion, is why, when there are vulnerabilities that are years old in internet-facing gear that is installed in, let's just say, critical infrastructure, why aren't these vulnerabilities being remediated? What's missing? What can we do to help to get us past it? Why are people gun shy of applying firmware and software updates? I mean, I get it. I've been in the trenches for a long time, but we have to come up with better solutions for it, because there's vulnerabilities that are out there, and we just take VPN and firewall appliances as an example. They're out there. We know threat actors are going after them, but still all the patches aren't being applied to all these devices. How do we address that?
Again, getting out of a long established mindset and culture. The thought of, well, we don't want downtime. And with ICS SCADA stuff, run it until it breaks can't be the way we do it anymore, because stuff is connected. We need network monitoring and visibility, and actually really doing that well to be able to alert for anomalies. What we expect to see should not blind us to the unexpected. What we need to be doing now is going and looking for the unexpected, because that is happening right under our noses. And it's just going to continue to claim more of that attack surface while we ignore it.
Mm. I was talking to Jason Healy, who's actually our guest for my other podcast, and he brought up some examples, and I think this is one that's pertinent to our discussion, is that we were kind of in a bad place with Microsoft Windows until they really nailed Microsoft Windows Update. But they didn't just nail it. They also kind of forced it on people. Like, these systems are, and it's a running joke now, right? Like, your system's going to update whether you like it or not. But it's that important. And I think that also kind of helps us overcome that mindset of, I can't do downtime, I can't apply updates. Yeah. Microsoft really forced that because they had to. Yeah. They had to protect, talk about critical infrastructure. Windows is everywhere. They had to protect that ecosystem. Yeah. And one of the ways they did that is a really solid update system. And you got to give Microsoft credit for building that. Now our task is, how do we apply that to all of these other devices? That it's a mixed bag. If you ever get it, there's a scale, right? You never get an update versus some devices that are updating all the time. I think my Ring doorbell is one I like to use as an example. I haven't dug into in a while, But I want to say they're applying the firmware updates behind the scenes, and it just constantly updates for you.
Make it painless, really. And that's with the manufacturers and suppliers. The concept of if you build it, they will come. If you make that update painless and you actually do it for people behind the scenes, then it happens. And then all they need to do is understand that it's going to happen at this time and adjust their schedules accordingly. This is just a fact. Like it's going to rain tomorrow. This update's going to roll through tomorrow. Therefore, we shouldn't be doing the following things to allow for that to happen and just have our people prepared in case something might go boom.
Everyone knows when Patch Tuesday is, right?
Yes.
Right.
And it's funny because we can learn as enterprise technologists, organizational technologists, whatever you want to call us, maybe government, might be enterprise. There's times we need to take a tip from the consumer space. And I think about the Ring doorbell, and I think about my Apple Watch. My Apple Watch is all the time telling me, just finished updating. Just FYI, we're updated. Thanks, Watch. I didn't have to do anything. Nothing. It just did it. Yeah. And that degree of cleanness to it. And I think when it comes to things like BIOS, like especially us old timers are terrified of updating BIOSes. All the warning messages about don't reboot, don't lose power, God forbid you sneeze while this is happening. I think there's some legacy fear around some of this stuff, but I think it needs to happen. I want my computer to be as self-update savvy as my Apple Watch is, bottom line. Absolutely. And everything else in my house for that matter, that's got a freaking network cable or a Wi-Fi chip on it.
And
so many people don't update their Apple devices either, though.
No, that's something, from the workspace, we needed to make sure that we got that out to, corporate communications to make sure that everybody who was using something like that had it updated. Why? Because it is connecting into the corporate network more than people even realize. But that exposure, and that is our other attack surface. It's all of our end users, however savvy they may be, but they are bringing in these devices that can be compromised. And Apple is no longer the walled garden of security that it once was. This has become the poster child now for attackers they aim for that. They're really working at building stuff that can compromise that. And they're getting it.
Yep. But you got to go out of your way to not update an iPhone. Like, my God, does it just press that and press that and press that issue? Like, you have to truly willfully ignore quite a lot to not update an iPhone.
Yeah.
They don't cram it down your throat, but they sure slap you upside the head with it.
Right.
No.
Well, and I think that, a lot of us that have worked in IT for a long time, we've been burned by updates. And so we're hesitant to apply updates. And I think that's something we need to address as cybersecurity professionals, is how we get over the mindset, right? It's a mindset. Yeah. You could go through all the checks and go, I think this update is going to go great. And we all know, we remember that one time where it didn't go great. Oh, yeah. It all takes us once. And now we're hesitant, like it works.
Now we're gun shy.
Don't touch it.
The pain of
the
rolling
word brick
it back
comes to mind.
Yeah. And right. The ability to roll it back, and then the pain if you do have that process.
Right.
Hope that
unless you completely bricked it, right?
Yeah.
Because that happens too. There's plenty of IoT that gets bricked.
Gosh, yeah.
Yep.
That's why the culture, right? Run until failure. And then you replace it with something new because they don't want a brick.
Yeah, and the replacing something new is I think part of our issue too, right? Is we have to get approval for that. We have to have resources for that implementation. It can mean downtime, and we sit here and I don't think many of us wonder why there's tens of thousands of devices out there that are vulnerable to the latest and greatest thing that documented threat actors are going after, but it's still there. And the reason that I believe it's still there is because there's poor people that are working in IT that are like, oh my God, I got to do this project now. And it's a big project and it's a lot of work, and it comes with operational risk and it comes with security risks. And, dealing with that is still not easy. I think in certain sectors it's getting, sections of technology, it's getting better, but we need to work towards that goal, I think.
Yeah. And a big part of that will be communication, like bringing both sides to the table better than we have been, and having I know it's a buzzword, empathy, but really for the people who are focused on security and the people who are focused on operational IT to be able to open-mindedly have these conversations so they can better understand what needs to be done and where each side is coming from. It's the way forward.
Cheryl, are you speaking anywhere coming up?
I haven't got any plans yet, but thanks for asking. It's just taking a bit of a downtime to recharge and watch things. I might be submitting for fall stuff coming up.
Sweet.
Yeah, but thanks.
And you're also involved with the Diana Initiative?
I am. Yes. So we have
if you give our audience like an overview of that and what you do for the Diana Initiative.
So I'm really honored to be one of the founding members of this organization, which came together in response to the desire to allow underrepresented voices, starting with women in security, but then realizing there were other people who really needed to and wanted to be part of the sharing, collaboration, opportunities to network. So once a year, we hold a conference at the same time as DEF CON, close by, so that all the people who have made the trek down to Vegas have the opportunity to come to what is, it feels like an oasis. So it's just a little step away from the madding crowds, and you get to have the full-on conference experience. Our call for submissions is actually open now, and we really love to encourage people, first-time speakers, get the chance to have mentoring, which is a fantastic opportunity. And you have an idea, you should get to share it. Believe in yourself. And that's really what we're trying to tell people with every iteration of the Diana Initiative is believe in yourself and we will believe in you as well. And there's a whole group of people you can become connected to who can build your career with you, share information with you, show you resources. And also just what we all really want and need to do is make some friends, make some personal connections in this world, in this community. And every year we try to find a relevant theme on drawing a bigger circle to bring more people in. So I just go visit our website, dianainitiative.org, and see what you would like to do and come and join us. Call for volunteers is also open. And volunteering is a wonderful way to discover this bigger community. And again, just make those connections. Thanks.
That's awesome. Yeah, we certainly need that. We need more cybersecurity people, I think, as we highlighted in this interview, right? Resources is a challenge. So more people is good. So thank you for being part of that initiative.
Thank you to all of our people who are like really making it happen. The staff and the volunteers are phenomenal. So big heart. Thank you.
Outstanding. Well, Cheryl, thank you for coming
so
on Below the Surface.
I was wearing my S-Bomb sticker today. Just
nice. Oh, I love it.
Nice.
I love it. I had not seen that one before. That's great. That's great. We need to do more evangelism for the S-Bomb as well. Certainly, I think this episode did some of that. So Thank you again. Alan, thank you as always. And thanks everyone for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.